You want to know something strange about the Royal Guard? It's not that they don't blink. That's the myth, right? Tourists love that one. Oh, look, he hasn't blinked in 4 minutes. But that's just a party trick. The real secret, the one they don't put in the brochures, is that the hardest thing to learn isn't standing still. It's learning how to breathe without looking alive. I learned that from a man named Sergeant Finn, and I watched him teach it to kids who were still soft in the face over and over until they turned into statues you could walk past without a second glance. This was 3 summers ago, just before the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. You know the spot, the pale gold stone of the palace front, the black railings that look like spiky teeth, and the crowd, always a crowd, pressed against the barriers like they were at a concert. The heat was miserable that day, the kind of London humidity that sticks to your collar and turns the air into wet wool. Tourists fanned themselves with paper maps. A little boy had dropped his ice cream on the gravel and was crying in that tired, hopeless way kids do when they've given up on the day. I was standing near the Canada Gate, not really paying attention. I come to watch the guard change because my dad used to bring me when I was small, and I'd fallen into the habit again after he passed. There's something steady about the routine. The red tunics, the bearskins, the boots that sound like falling stones on the pavement. It makes you feel like the world still has rules. The old guard was already formed up inside the forecourt. The new guard was marching in from Wellington Barracks. And there off to the side, near the ambulatory gate, I saw Sergeant Finn. You'd notice Finn even in a crowd of guardsmen. Not because he was tall. He wasn't really. Average height, solid build, close-cropped gray hair that looked like it had been trimmed with a lawnmower. It was his face. Finn had the kind of face that seemed carved from something harder than skin. His eyes were pale blue and absolutely still. When he looked at you, you felt like a bird being watched by a cat. Not threatened, just noticed in a way that made your spine straighten without permission. He had 4 new recruits lined up in front of him. They weren't in the full dress uniforms yet. Just the working dress, light blue shirts, dark trousers, berets. They looked young. The youngest couldn't have been more than 18. His name was Davies, I'd learn later. He had acne on his chin and a nervous habit of swallowing every few seconds. The tourists didn't notice them. Why would they? The real show was happening at the front gates. But I was leaning against the railing, and I had a clear view of the side courtyard. So I watched. Build tension Finn walked slowly down the line. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at each of them, one by one, like he was reading labels on King Goods. Then he stopped in front of Davies. "You're moving," Finn said. His voice was quiet. Not a whisper, but the kind of quiet that forces you to lean in. I could barely hear him from where I stood. Davies blinked. "Sir, your chest," Finn said. He tapped his own sternum with 2 fingers. "It's going up and down. I can see it from 10 yards. Davies looked down at his own chest, confused. Then he looked back up. I need to breathe, Sergeant." The other 3 recruits froze. They didn't laugh. They knew better. Finn's face didn't change. He just stood there, hand behind his back, staring at Davies like he'd just announced that water was wet. "Do you think I don't know that?" Finn said. "Do you think I've forgotten what lungs are for?" Davies shook his head quickly. "No, Sergeant." "Then listen close." Finn stomped closer, close enough that his shadow fell over the boy's face. "Everyone breathes. A dead man doesn't. And you, Davies, are supposed to look like a dead man in a red coat. Not a man who's nervous. Not a man who's hot. Not a man who's bored. A dead man. Do you understand the difference?" Davies nodded. His throat moved as he swallowed again. "Good," Finn said. "So here's the lesson. Breathing is a weakness. It betrays you. It tells the crowd that you're human, and the moment they think you're human, they start poking. They start whispering. They start taking pictures of your nose hairs." He paused. "So you will learn to breathe without looking alive. You will take air in through your nose, slow enough that a butterfly couldn't feel it. You will hold it. You will let it out through your teeth over 10 seconds without moving your shoulders. Your chest will not rise. Your stomach will not push. You will become a stone that happens to have lungs." He stepped back. "All 4 of you. Position of attention. Now." They snapped to it. Feet at 45 degrees. Hands curled at the seams of their trousers. Chins up. eyes forward. I'd seen that posture 100 times from the guards at the palace, but watching these kids learn it was different. There was something fragile about them. They were trying so hard to be hard. Finn walked behind them. He moved silently for a man his size. When he got to the second recruit, a tall, skinny kid named Patel with ears that stuck out, he stopped. "You're holding your breath," Finn said. Patel didn't answer. His face was already turning pink. "Breathe," Finn said. "But don't let me see it." Patel tried. I saw his jaw tighten. His nostrils flared just a little. Then nothing. His chest stayed still. His shoulders didn't move. But after about 15 seconds, his face started to go from pink to red. "Too slow," Finn said. "You're starving yourself. That's not the same as being still. If you pass out, you're useless. And if you're useless, you're not a guardsman. You're a liability in a nice hat." He moved to the third recruit, a girl. I was surprised, not because women aren't in the guard now, but because I hadn't seen many on the palace detail. Her name was Hendrix. She had short brown hair and a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts. She wasn't blushing. She wasn't shaking. She just stood there like a fence post. Finn leaned in close to her ear. "How are you doing, Hendrix?" "Fine, Sergeant," she said. Her voice was steady. "Show me." Hendrix took a breath. I couldn't see it. I was maybe 20 feet away, and I couldn't see a single sign of air moving through her body. No Schulterlift. No chest rise. No nostril flare. She just stood there and somehow kept standing, and after a few seconds, she let the breath out so slowly that I only noticed because her collar settled back against her neck. Finn stared at her for a long 5 seconds. Then he nodded. Just once. It was the smallest approval I'd ever seen a person give, but Hendrix's eyes got a little brighter. "That's it," Finn said. "That's the trick. You don't stop breathing. You just stop being seen breathing. You make your body forget it's alive." He turned back to the whole line. "Now, we're going to do this until sunset. And tomorrow we'll do it again. And the day after that. And by the time you put on those red tunics, you'll be so good at looking dead that your own mothers will walk past you without a wave." The crowd at the main gate cheered. The new guard had arrived. The band was playing something slow and brass-heavy. But in that side courtyard, under the gray London sky, 4 young soldiers stood perfectly still, learning to disappear inside their own skin. I stayed longer than I meant to. The guard change ended. The tourists drifted away toward the tube station or the park. But Finn kept them there. He walked among them like a gardener, checking on hedges. Every few minutes, he'd stop in front of one of them and just watch. Sometimes he'd say "too fast," or "too shallow," or "you're thinking about it too much." And they'd adjust. Tiny, invisible adjustments. The kind you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for them. And I was looking. I don't know why. Maybe because my dad had been a soldier once, before he got old and soft. He used to tell me that the hardest part of basic training wasn't the running or the push-ups. It was learning to be still when every muscle in your body was screaming to move. I never understood that until I watched Finn teach those kids how to breathe like corpses. Part 2. The tourist and the test setup continued. The next day, I went back. I told myself it was because the weather was nice, or because I had nothing better to do. But really, I wanted to see if they'd improved. Those 4 kids, Davies, Patel, Hendrix, and the 4th one I hadn't named yet, a stocky kid from Manchester called Rigby. They'd been so raw the day before. So human. I wanted to see if Finn could sand the humanity off them in just 24 hours. He could. Sort of. They were in the same spot, just inside the side gate that leads to the palace gardens. This time, they were in full dress. Scarlet tunics. Bearskin caps that added a foot to their height. White leather belts with brass fittings that caught the light. They looked like toys, like something you buy in a gift shop and put on a shelf. But their eyes were real. Davy still had that nervous swallow. Patel's ears were still pink at the tips. Hendrix still looked like she could punch through a wall. Finn stood in front of them, hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't in uniform, just a dark polo shirt and cargo trousers. But he had a presence that made the uniform irrelevant. He could have been wearing a bin bag, and you'd still stand up straight when he walked by. Today, Finn said, "We're adding variables." He He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black remote. The kind you'd use for a presentation clicker. He held it up so they could see. This remote, he said, controls a speaker I've hidden in that bush over there. He pointed to a laurel hedge near the wall. I'm going to play sounds. Random sounds. Loud sounds. Annoying sounds. And you're not going to react. You're not going to flinch. You're not going to blink faster. You're going to breathe like I taught you. And you're going to keep your eyes on the horizon. And you're going to look so dead that if a crow landed on your shoulder, it would think it had found a statue. He pressed a button. A scream came out of the hedge. A woman's scream. High and sharp and absolutely blood-curdling. It lasted 3 seconds and then stopped. None of them moved. Not one muscle. Davy's face went pale, but his head didn't turn. Patel's nostrils flared once, then went still. Rigby's hands twitched at his sides, barely a millimeter. Hendricks didn't react at all. She looked like she'd been carved from the same stone as the palace. Finn pressed the button again. This time it was a baby crying. The horrible, frantic kind of crying that makes your chest tighten even when you know it's fake. It went on for 10 seconds. 15. 20. Still nothing. Then Finn pressed it again, and a man's voice shouted, "Oi, you, in the red coat. Yeah, you. Look at me." This was different. This wasn't a sound effect. This was a real man, standing about 30 feet away, just on the other side of the low wall that separated the courtyard from the public path. He was a tourist, Australian by the accent, sunburned nose, khaki shorts, a camera strap around his neck. He was pointing at Davies. "You," the Australian said again, louder now. "I'm talking to you, mate. Can you hear me?" Build tension in the crowd around the Australian murmured. A few people pulled out their phones. This happens sometimes. Tourists who think the guards are mannequins, or who think it's funny to try to make them break. Most of them give up after a few seconds. But this guy was drunk. I could tell by the way he swayed on his feet and the glassy shine in his eyes. Davies didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on some invisible point in the middle distance. His breathing, I was close enough to see it now, was almost perfect. His chest barely moved. His shoulders were still as stone. The Australian took a step closer. He was right up against the wall now, leaning over it, his sunburned face just a few feet from Davies' profile. I said, "Can you hear me?" He waved a hand in front of Davies' face. "Hello. Anyone home?" A woman in the crowd laughed nervously. Someone's kid asked, "Mummy, why isn't he moving?" Finn didn't intervene. He just stood there, behind the line of recruits, watching. His face was unreadable, but I noticed his right hand had curled into a fist at his side. The Australian got bolder. He reached out and tapped Davies' bearskin cap with his finger. Just a little tap, but it was enough. A ripple went through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone else said, "Oh, he shouldn't have done that." Davies still didn't move. His eyes didn't blink. His chest didn't rise. He was a photograph, a painting, a dead thing in a beautiful coat. But I saw his throat move. Just once. A swallow. The Australian laughed. "See? Nothing. They're like robots, these blokes." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms like a performer. "Watch this." He raised his hand again. This time, he was going to poke Davies in the face. And then Finn moved. I didn't see him cross the distance. 1 second, he was standing behind the line. The next second, he was between Davies and the Australian, his body blocking the tourist's hand like a door slamming shut. "Step back," Finn said. His voice was still quiet, but it had changed. There was something in it that hadn't been there before. Something that sounded like gravel grinding under a heavy wheel. The Australian blinked. "What?" "You are interfering with a member of His Majesty's Guard," Finn said. "Step back, or I will have you removed." The Australian's drunk confidence flickered. He looked at Finn's face, really looked at it, and something in his own face changed. He saw it. The thing I'd noticed the first time I saw Finn. That flat, pale-eyed stillness that wasn't human patience. It was predator patience. The kind that waits. All right, the Australian muttered, backing away. "No need to get your knickers in a twist. Just having a bit of fun." He shuffled back into the crowd, and the crowd parted around him like water around a stone. Within a minute, he was gone, wandering toward the palace gates with his camera swinging against his chest. Climax Finn turned back to the line. He walked slowly down the row, looking at each recruit. Davies. Patel. Rigby. Hendricks. He stopped in front of Davies. You swallowed, Finn said. Davies' face went tight. Sergeant, you swallowed, Finn repeated. I saw it. The crowd saw it. That Australian probably saw it, if he'd been paying attention. You broke. Silence. The band was playing somewhere in the distance. God Save the King. The tourists were clapping. Davies' lower lip trembled. Just a little. Just for a second. Then, he got it under control. I am sorry, Sergeant. Sorry doesn't matter, Finn said. What matters is that you looked alive for 1 second. 1 second out of 4 hours. And that 1 second is what people will remember. Not the 4 hours. The 1 second. He stepped closer to Davies. Close enough that their chests were almost touching. Do you know why we wear these uniforms? Finn asked. His voice was low now. Private. I had to lean into here. It's not for the tourists. It's not for the pictures. It's not for the Queen, God rest her, or the King, or any of that. We wear these uniforms because they are a promise. A promise that we are not like other people. That we can stand in the rain and the heat and the screaming and the poking and the drunk Australians, and we will not flinch. We will not blink. We will not swallow. He paused. Because if we flinch, he said, then the promise is broken. And if the promise is broken, then we're just men in costumes. And men in costumes don't protect anything. Davies' eyes were wet. Not crying, just wet. He didn't blink them dry. He just stood there, looking at that invisible point on the horizon, letting the wetness sit in his eyes like morning dew on a statue. Finn stepped back. Again, he said, from the top. Position of attention. They snapped back into place. Finn walked to the laurel hedge and pressed the remote. The baby started crying again. The woman screamed again. The Australian's voice shouted, Oi, you, look at me. And the four of them stood like stones, like dead things, like promises wrapped in red cloth. I watched for another hour. The sun moved across the courtyard. Shadows shortened and lengthened. Tourists came and went, taking photos, whispering to each other, testing the limits. A little girl dropped her stuffed rabbit at Patel's feet, and her mother had to crawl under the rope to get it back. A teenager made a rude gesture behind Rigby's back, while his friends filmed it on their phones. A pigeon landed on Hendricks' bearskin and stayed there for a full 7 minutes, cooing directly into her ear. None of them moved. None of them blinked. None of them swallowed. But I was watching Hendricks now, and I noticed something. Every few minutes, her collar would settle against her neck. Just a tiny shift. A millimeter of fabric moving back into place. And I realized that was her breath. That was the only sign, the only tell, the only evidence that there was a living, breathing 20-year-old woman inside that shell of wool and brass and fur. She was breathing without looking alive. Finn noticed it too. I saw him watching her from the corner of his eye. And I saw something else. Something I almost didn't believe. He smiled. Just a little. Just for a second. Then it was gone, and he was all stone again. Part 3. The night watch set up 3 months later. I almost forgot about Finn and his recruits. Life got busy. Work. Bills. The usual dull crush of ordinary days. But then my sister called and said she wanted to see the lights at the palace. They do a Christmas display now, projections on the front facade, and I found myself standing in the same spot near Canada Gate on a freezing December night, watching the crowd shiver under the street lamps. The palace was lit up like a birthday cake, gold and blue and red swirling across the stone. Families huddled together, breath fogging in the cold. A choir was singing Silent Night somewhere out of sight, the sound drifting through the dark like smoke. And there at the front entrance stood the guard. They were in their winter greatcoats now, dark gray, almost black, with the bearskins still towering above. They looked like figures from an old photograph. Ghosts in wool. I recognized one of them. It was Hendricks. She was posted at the left side of the main gate, her back to the palace, her face toward the crowd. She looked different. Harder, maybe, or maybe just more settled. The nervous energy she'd had in the courtyard was gone. In its place was something quiet, something finished. I walked closer. Not too close. The barriers were up, but close enough to see her face. She wasn't blinking. Of course she wasn't. But more than that, she wasn't there. I don't know how else to say it. Her body was present, but herself, the part of her that was Hendrix, the girl who'd blushed when Finn praised her, had retreated somewhere deep inside. Her eyes were open, but they weren't looking at anything. They were just receiving light, like windows in an empty house. She was breathing. I knew she was, but I couldn't see it. Not even a collar trick. Not even a nostril flare. She had become exactly what Finn had asked her to become. A dead thing in a beautiful coat. Build tension. The crowd was thick and loud. Kids were running around, waving light-up wands. A group of drunk office workers in Santa hats were singing off-key carols. A man with a tray of hot chestnuts was shouting prices. It was chaos. The kind of cheerful, messy chaos that London does so well at Christmas. And in the middle of it, Hendrix stood like a tombstone. I watched her for a long time. 10 minutes. 20. The cold was seeping through my boots, and my fingers were numb around my coffee cup, but I couldn't look away. There was something hypnotic about her stillness. Something that made the chaos around her seem smaller. Less real. Then I noticed the man. He was standing near the barrier, about 10 feet to Hendrix's left. Mid-30s. Dark coat. Beanie pulled low over his forehead. He wasn't watching the light show. He wasn't singing along with the carols. He was watching Hendrix. And not in the way tourists watch guards. The usual curiosity, the are they real stare. This was different. This was focused. Intent. He had his hands in his pockets. His shoulders were hunched against the cold. But every few seconds he'd shift his weight from one foot to the other like he was working up to something. I didn't think much of it at first. London attracts all kinds. Maybe he was just drunk. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But then he took a step closer to the barrier. And another. And another. Until he was leaning against the metal railing, no more than 6 feet from Hendrix's position. He looked around. Checked the crowd. Checked the other guards. Then he pulled his right hand out of his pocket. There was something in it. Small. Metallic. It caught the light from the palace projection. A quick flash of silver. And then he hit it again, cupped in his palm. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what it was. A knife? A bottle opener? A phone? But the way he was holding it, hidden, close to his body, angled toward Hendrix, made every hair on my arm stand up. I opened my mouth to shout, to warn her, to do something. But then I stopped, because Hendrix had already seen him. Climax, she hadn't moved. That was the thing. Her body was still locked in that perfect dead posture. Her eyes were still fixed on the horizon. But something had changed. Something I couldn't name. A tension in the air around her. A shift in the atmosphere, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The man leaned forward. He was close now. Close enough to touch her if the barrier weren't there. His right hand was still cupped, still hidden. His face was pale and tight. "You're not real," he whispered. I barely heard it over the choir, but I heard it. "You're not real. You're just a doll. A doll in a hat." He raised his hand, and Hendrix moved. Not much. Not the way a normal person would move, flinching back, raising an arm, shouting. She moved the way a statue would move if a statue could move. Slow, deliberate, terrifying. Her head turned, just a few degrees, just enough that her eyes, those empty, window-like eyes, were suddenly looking directly at the man's face. And she spoke. "Step away from the barrier." Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it cut through the noise of the crowd like a blade through fog. The man froze. His hand stopped mid-reach. "Step away," Hendrix said again. "I will move you myself." The man's face crumpled. Whatever courage he'd been drinking from, it ran out in that moment. His hand dropped. His shoulders sagged. He stumbled backward, bumping into a woman with a pram, muttering apologies, and then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd, disappearing into the Christmas lights like a bad dream burning off in the morning. Hendrix turned her head back to the front. Her eyes went empty again. Her chest went still. Her breath disappeared. She was a statue again. But I had seen it. That 1 second of aliveness. That flash of something human behind a mask. And I realized, standing there in the cold with my coffee going lukewarm, that I had misunderstood everything. Resolution, I thought Finn was teaching them to be dead, to erase themselves, to become objects instead of people. But that wasn't at all. He was teaching them a hide. to bury the aliveness so deep that no one could find it. Not the tourists, not the drunks, not the men with small metal things hidden in their palms. But the aliveness was still there. It had to be, because when the moment came, the real moment, the one that mattered, Hendrix had brought it back. Not all the way back, just enough. Just enough to turn her head and speak and make a man run. She wasn't a statue. She was a soldier wearing a statue like a coat. And underneath the coat, underneath the stillness and the bearskin and the brass, she was still that girl with the short brown hair and the jaw like a walnut cracker. Still breathing, still alive, still ready. The choir finished Silent Night. The crowd clapped. The lights on the palace shifted from gold to blue to red. And Hendrix stood there in the middle of it all, not moving, not blinking, not breathing where anyone could see. I stayed until the display ended, until the crowd thinned and the street sweepers came out and the palace went dark except for the security lights. And when I finally turned to leave, I saw something that stopped me cold. Sergeant Finn was standing at the edge of the courtyard. He wasn't in uniform, just a worn leather jacket and a scarf. He was holding a paper cup of tea, steam rising from the lid. He was looking at Hendrix, and he was smiling. A real smile this time, not the small, hidden one from the summer. A full, tired, proud smile that softened every hard line in his face. He raised his teacup, a small salute, a toast to no one. Then he turned and walked away into the dark, and I never saw him again. Ending line, I think about that night sometimes. About Finn and Hendrix and the four kids learning to breathe like corpses in the summer heat. About the Australian and the man with the metal thing in his palm. About all the tourists who walked past those guards every day and saw nothing but red coats and tall hats. They don't know. That's the thing. They take their pictures and post their captions so still, like wax figures. And they have no idea that underneath the wax, underneath the wool, there are hearts beating slow and steady, lungs filling and emptying in secret, eyes watching everything, missing nothing. Finn taught them how to breathe without looking alive. But he also taught them when to stop pretending. And that's the part that matters. That's the part that keeps the palaces safe and the tourists bored and the drunk Australians on the other side of the wall. They're not statues. They're not dolls. They are not mannequins in nice hats. They're the stillest, quietest, most dangerous people you will ever walk past without a second glance. And if you're lucky, you'll never see them breathe.